It was a drizzly night. My Uncle George showed up at our door after more than 30 years of silence. He was 62 then, a wiry man with salt and pepper hair thinning at the temples, deep lines etched around his blue eyes from years of hard living, and a faded tattoo on his forearm from his Navy days. He carried an old leather suitcase, the kind with brass buckles that had seen better decades. "Jennifer," he said, his voice gravelly from too many cigarettes in his youth, "I got nowhere else to go. Mind if I stay a while?" I stood there in the doorway of our modest ranch house in rural Ohio, the screen door creaking as I pushed it open. Robert, my husband, was inside watching the kids, our 3 little ones, all under 10 at the time. The house smelled of the pot roast I just pulled from the oven, a simple meal for a family scraping by. Uncle George was my father's brother, but Dad had passed young, and the family had scattered like leaves in the wind. I hadn't seen George since I was a girl, back when he'd send occasional postcards from truck stops across the country. Robert pulled me aside into our bedroom, his face furrowed with worry. He was a sturdy man, broad-shouldered from his job at the local auto parts factory, with dark hair he kept short and a mustache that tickled when he kissed me. "Jen, a few days is one thing, but long-term? We're barely making ends meet as it is. The kids' school supplies alone cost us $300 this year, and with Tim starting college soon— No, wait, that was later. Back then, our oldest was just hitting middle school, but the bills were piling up. Groceries, utilities, that leaky roof we couldn't afford to fix. Another mouth to feed? I couldn't blame him. We were living paycheck to paycheck, Robert earning $45,000 a year, me working part-time at the diner for $12 an hour, tips included. But looking at Uncle George standing there on the porch, his shoulders slumped under a worn flannel shirt, something tugged at me. "He's family, Robert. 62 and alone. Remember what he did for my folks back in the day? Sent money when Dad was sick." Robert sighed, rubbing his calloused hands together. "All right, but we set boundaries. He eats what we eat. No extras." We settled Uncle George in the spare room, the one with the creaky twin bed where our son usually crashed during sleepovers. It was small but cozy, with a window overlooking the backyard where I'd planted a vegetable garden to stretch our budget. That first night, I made a simple chicken dinner, $20 worth of groceries stretched for 5. Uncle George ate quietly, his hands trembling slightly as he held the fork, his face weathered like old leather from years on the road. As the weeks turned to months, Uncle George became part of the routine. He wasn't one to sit idle. He'd rise at dawn, his gray hair tousled, and take walks around the neighborhood, coming back with stories of his travels. But money was tight. Our daughter needed braces, we didn't have enough money, and the car broke down. Robert and I argued in whispers at night, but we made it work. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a bond that would redefine family for me. Uncle George's presence brought both comfort and strain. He was a quiet man, his blue eyes often distant, as if replaying memories from a life full of regrets. I'd catch him staring at old photos in his suitcase, faded pictures of a woman with kind eyes and a boy with his smile. His wife and son, lost too young, or so the family whispers went. I never pried. Some wounds don't heal with words. Our home was a 3-bedroom fixer-upper we'd bought in 1998, mortgage payments eating $900 a month. With 3 kids, Tim, Sarah, and little Mike, the place felt crowded. Robert worked overtime when he could, coming home with grease-stained clothes and a tired grin. He was the rock, but even rocks crack under pressure. "Jen, the electric bill's up this month," he'd say, and I'd nod, clipping coupons for the grocery run. One day, about 2 months in, I slipped while carrying laundry. My arm twisted wrong, and pain shot through like fire. Robert was at work, so Uncle George loaded me into our old Ford pickup, rust spots and all, and drove me to the ER. The doctor said it was a fracture. Clowned $200 after insurance. When we got home, I found Uncle George in the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, stirring a pot of soup. "You rest, Jennifer," he said, his voice firm but gentle. His hands, spotted with age, moved with surprising steadiness. That incident shifted something. Robert saw it too. "He's pulling his weight," he admitted one night as we lay in bed, the fan whirring overhead. Uncle George started helping more, mowing the lawn with our push mower, fixing the fence for $50 in materials we'd put off. Flashbacks came in waves. As a kid, Uncle George had been the fun uncle, buying ice cream when my parents, favoring my brother Andrew, said no. Andrew was the golden child. Even then, Mom and Dad poured everything into him: Little League uniforms, guitar lessons. Me? Hand-me-downs, and be grateful, Jennifer. It stung, but I buried it. Now, with Uncle George here, those old resentments bubbled up. Why had my parents always chosen Andrew? By year's end, we adjusted. The kids loved Uncle George's stories, tales of hitchhiking across the Rockies, his face animated under the kitchen light. But money woes loomed. Tim's college fund? "We'll manage," Robert said, hugging me close, his arms strong from years of labor. Time slipped away quietly, like sand through an hourglass, and before I knew it, a full decade had passed since Uncle George first arrived on our doorstep, and he had turned 72 that spring. His once salt and pepper hair was now completely white, thin and wispy, like fresh snow on a bare branch, and he walked with a noticeable limp from an old knee injury he'd gotten years ago while working on cars. But those blue eyes of his, they still sparkled with a quiet energy, especially when he was around the grandkids. Our oldest son, Tim, had just welcomed his first child that year, a chubby little boy with curly hair and an infectious giggle. Uncle George would light up like a Christmas tree whenever he held him. "Come here, you little tyke," he'd coo in his gravelly voice, carefully cradling the baby in his gnarled, arthritic hands, as if he were handling the most precious glass ornament. "Reminds me of when you were small, Jennifer, full of life and mischief." Our family situation had improved a bit over those years, though it was never easy. Robert had finally gotten that promotion he'd been gunning for at the factory, moving up to supervisor and boosting his annual salary to $55,000. It meant more responsibility, longer hours overseeing the assembly line, coming home with his broad shoulders tense from the day's stress, but it also gave us a little breathing room. I had transitioned from part-time shifts at the diner to a full-time administrative job at a local insurance office, adding another $28,000 to our household income. We weren't living large by any means. The kids' activities and school fees still added up quickly. Sarah, our middle child, was getting married that summer, and the wedding expenses were mostly scraped together from our savings account, which we'd been building penny by penny. We cut corners where we could. Second-hand decorations, a potluck reception with dishes from friends and family. Uncle George didn't say much about it, but he quietly stepped in to help. He spent weekends transforming our backyard into a charming venue, stringing up affordable fairy lights and renting folding chairs. His hands, spotted with age and calluses from his mechanic days, worked steadily, hammering stakes and arranging tables until everything looked just right. "No need to fuss over me," he'd mutter when I thanked him, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. The wedding was beautiful, a sunny afternoon filled with laughter, vows exchanged under a homemade arch of wildflowers from our garden. That evening, after the guests had gone home and the kids were tucked in, Robert and I joined Uncle George on the front porch for a quiet moment. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass, and the Ohio sky was alive with twinkling stars. We cracked open a few cold beers from the fridge, nothing fancy, just the six-pack Robert kept for special occasions. I raised my bottle in a toast, the glass clinking softly against theirs. "Uncle George, you've been an absolute godsend these past 10 years, I said sincerely, looking him in the eye. "We couldn't have managed half as well without you pitching in like you do." He took a slow sip, his face illuminated by the porch light, and for a moment, his expression softened into something vulnerable. He set the bottle down on the wooden railing with a gentle thud and sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping under his faded plaid shirt. "Jennifer, I've had my share of failures in this life," he admitted, his voice low and rough, like gravel under tires. "Lost my family when I was still young, my wife to a long battle with cancer, and our boy. He was only 8 when a car accident took him. Hit me like a freight train. I roamed the country for decades after that, too ashamed to settle anywhere, too broken to start over." I leaned forward, my heart aching for him as he continued, his words tumbling out like a dam finally breaking. "Back in the 70s, I ran a small auto repair shop out west, made decent money, about $40,000 a year back then, which went far. I'd send cash to your parents whenever I could, especially after your dad got laid off from the mill. Helped cover bills, maybe $1,000 here and there. But then tragedy hit hard. My son's leukemia treatments drained everything, over $50,000 in medical bills, selling off tools and equipment just to keep fighting. When he passed, my wife couldn't bear it. Grief took her within a year. I sold the shop for whatever I could get, hit the road, and didn't look back. Your folks sent me $500 once when I was flat broke, sleeping in my truck. It kept me going. But now, with you and Robert, this place feels like home again. A real home." Tears glistened in his faded blue eyes, and he wiped them away with the back of his hand, chuckling softly to mask the emotion. Robert reached over and patted his back firmly, his own voice steady but warm. "You're more than welcome here, Uncle. Your family, blood or not, you've earned your place." That night sealed it for all of us. Despite the ongoing struggles, like Sarah needing braces, or the unexpected car transmission repair, Uncle George was never a burden. In fact, he lightened our load in small but meaningful ways, tending the vegetable garden each summer, which saved us money on fresh produce, fixing leaky faucets without calling a plumber, even babysitting the grandkids so Robert and I could have a rare date night. But as we built this new family rhythm, echoes of my own past kept resurfacing, adding layers to my gratitude. My parents had always played favorites with my brother Andrew. He was the one who got the shiny new bike for $200 when we were kids, while I pedaled an old hand-me-down that squeaked with every turn. College was the same story. They covered his $20,000 tuition without batting an eye. But for me, it was student loans and part-time jobs. "Girls marry out and start their own families," Mom had said dismissively, her words like a slap. It had hurt deeply back then, leaving scars of resentment. Yet caring for Uncle George taught me a profound lesson. True family isn't defined by blood or obligation. It's forged through choices, kindness, and shared hardships. He had chosen us, and we had chosen him, creating bonds stronger than any I'd known growing up. As Uncle George turned 80 in early 2020, the world ground to a halt with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. He had grown noticeably frailer over the years, his once sturdy frame now thinner and more delicate, his skin pale and papery like old parchment, marked by the passage of time. Yet his spirit remained unbroken. Those sharp blue eyes still twinkled with quiet determination, even as his steps slowed and he leaned more heavily on the wooden cane. We transformed our home into a fortress against the virus, stocking up on masks, hand sanitizers, and disinfectants. "Don't fuss over me like I'm some fragile antique," Uncle George would grumble in his gravelly voice, waving a hand dismissively as I handed him a fresh mask. But beneath the complaint, there was compliance. He'd slip it on without further protest, adjusting it over his nose with those age-spotted fingers. We'd sit together in the living room, the TV tuned to the evening news, his eyes narrowing in concern as reports of rising cases filled the screen. "This world's gone mad," he'd mutter, shaking his head. "But we'll get through it, Jennifer. We've faced worse." To keep spirits up, Uncle George found ways to contribute from afar. With the grandkids stuck at home for remote schooling, he'd hop on Zoom calls from his laptop, a refurbished one we'd picked up during a sale. His voice, steady and warm despite the slight tremor, would light up their faces as he read bedtime stories or shared tales from his Navy days. "Kids need a sense of normalcy in times like these," he'd tell me afterward, his faded blue eyes softening. "Remember when your dad and I were boys during the oil crisis? We made do with what we had. Same here." Those virtual sessions became a lifeline, not just for the little ones, but for all of us, reminding me how his presence had woven itself into the fabric of our family. Our finances took a hit during those uncertain months. Robert was furloughed from the factory for 3 long months, costing us nearly $10,000 in lost wages. He paced the house restlessly, his broad shoulders tense, worrying about the mortgage that ran another $300. I shifted to remote work at my office job, typing away at a desk in the corner of the dining room, but the bills kept mounting. Utilities jumped with everyone home all day, and grocery deliveries added fees we hadn't budgeted for. "Jen, how are we going to make ends meet?" Robert asked one night, his voice low as we sat at the kitchen table after the kids were asleep. I squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses from years of hard labor. "We'll cut back where we can. We've got that emergency fund, $2,000 we can dip into if needed." It was a tough conversation, but it pulled us closer, much like Uncle George's quiet support did. We'd planned a modest celebration for his 80th birthday, a backyard gathering with the family, balloons and a homemade cake. But as cases surged, we had to cancel it all. Instead, we made do with a simple store-bought chocolate cake, lit candles around the kitchen table, and sang "Happy Birthday" with masks half pulled down. Uncle George blew them out with a chuckle, his white hair catching the light. "Best birthday yet," he said, slicing into it. "Family's all I need." In those quiet joys, amid the pandemic's shadows, our bond grew unbreakable, a testament to resilience and love chosen every day. The year 2023 dawned with a quiet unease that settled over our home like a persistent fog. Uncle George, now 82, had changed in subtle ways that worried us all. His once vibrant blue eyes seemed dimmer, clouded by the weight of years, and his white hair, thin and wispy like cotton candy, framed a face that had grown gaunt. He spent hours in his favorite armchair by the window, staring out at the backyard where the old oak tree he'd helped plant decades ago stood tall. "He's not himself anymore," Robert confided in me one evening as we washed dishes after dinner. Robert's own hair had turned mostly gray by then, a testament to the stresses of factory life and raising our family. "He barely talks, Jen. Just sits there, lost in thought. Do you think we should take him to the doctor again?" I nodded, wiping my hands on a dish towel, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "I've noticed it too. He used to chatter away about his Navy stories or tease the grandkids. Now it's like he's fading right before our eyes." We decided to monitor him closely, but Uncle George brushed off our concerns with a weak smile. "I'm just old, Jennifer. Nothing a good nap won't fix," he'd say, his voice softer than before, laced with a resignation that broke my heart. Then came that fateful morning in early spring. I woke up earlier than usual, the house still shrouded in dawn's gray light, and headed to the kitchen to start coffee. The spare room door was ajar, which was unusual. Uncle George always kept it closed for privacy. A chill ran down my spine as I peeked in. There he lay, peaceful as if in deep slumber, his chest no longer rising and falling. No struggle, no pain. Just gone, slipped away in the night. I froze, my hand trembling as I reached out to touch his cool forehead. "Uncle George?" I whispered, but I knew. Tears blurred my vision as I called Robert. He rushed in, his face paling as he checked for a pulse. "Oh, Jen, he's passed." We held each other, sobbing quietly in the dim room, the weight of loss crashing over us like a wave. The grief was immediate and raw, ripping through our family like a storm. The kids, now adults with lives of their own, rushed home as soon as we called. Tim arrived first, his wife and young son in tow, his eyes red-rimmed. Grandpa George was like a second dad to me, he choked out, hugging me tightly. Sarah and Mike followed, the house filling with muffled cries and shared memories around the kitchen table. We reminisced about his quiet kindness, how he'd fixed Mike's bike for free when we couldn't afford a new one, or taught Sarah to garden over the years. He never complained, Mom, Sarah said through tears, her voice breaking. Even when we were tight on money, he made us feel like we had everything. Arranging the funeral was a blur of paperwork and decisions. The casket, the service, the plot in the local cemetery, all paid for from our savings, which we had built up over the years. We kept it simple, just like Uncle George would have wanted. A small gathering at the church, with coffee and sandwiches afterward. But amid the mourning, trouble stirred. My cousins from Dad's side, Mark and Paul, burly men in their 50s with greedy eyes and forced sympathies, showed up uninvited a few days after the burial. They'd barely visited Uncle George in 20 years, yet here they were, demanding their share of any inheritance. "Look, Jennifer," Mark said gruffly. His face flushed as he stood in our living room, arms crossed over his plaid shirt. Uncle George was family to all of us. He must have left something behind. Savings, maybe some valuables. We're entitled to our cut. You can't just hog it all because he lived here. Paul nodded vigorously, his balding head shining under the lamp. "Yeah, we've got families too. If there's money, we deserve a piece. Don't make this ugly." Robert stepped in, his voice steady but edged with anger. "Ugly? You two never lifted a finger for him. No calls, no visits. We took him in, fed him, cared for him for 2 decades. If there's anything, it's ours by right and by heart." The argument escalated, voices rising until I couldn't take it. "Fine," I said, my hands shaking as I pointed to the spare room. "Let's settle this. His old suitcase is still under the bed. That's all he had. Go ahead, open it in front of everyone." Mike, our youngest, now in his 20s with a beard like his father's, dragged out the worn leather case, its brass buckles tarnished. The cousins pounced, unzipping it eagerly. First layer, faded clothes from his younger days, old flannel shirts and jeans. Nothing valuable. Mark shook them out roughly, muttering, "Nothing here." Paul tossed them aside, but Mike carefully folded them back, his eyes misty. Deeper in, a stack of yellowed photos, pristine despite the years. Images of Uncle George's late wife, a woman with soft curls and a warm smile, and their young son laughing in a park. These are all he had left of them," I whispered, tears streaming as I held one up. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of his lost family hanging heavy. Paul grumbled, "Useless junk," and shoved them aside, but Robert glared. "Show some respect." At the bottom, a single envelope, sealed, dated 2020, the height of the pandemic. Paul snatched it, ripping it open. "Read it aloud," I insisted, my voice firm despite the grief. Mike took it, his hands steady, and began, "Dear Jennifer, Robert and family, if you're reading this, I've gone on to join my beloved Mary and little Tommy. I never dreamed I'd find peace in my old age, but you gave me that, a real home after so much wandering. Jennifer, you've been like the daughter I lost, kind and strong. Robert, a true brother in every way. The kids brought joy to my days. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Especially you, Jennifer. You treated me like your own father, never making me feel like a burden. In return, I've left what little I had, $50,000 in a savings account at First Ohio Bank, notarized through the village clerk to go solely to your family. I saved it quietly over the years, never touching it, because I didn't want money to come between us. True bonds aren't built on dollars. They're forged in love and sacrifice. Use it wisely. Maybe for the grandkids' education or fixing that roof. To my nephews Mark and Paul, I don't blame you for keeping distance. Life's hard. But this is for those who gave without asking. With all my love, Uncle George." The room went still. Mark's face turned beet red. his mouth opening and closing like a fish. This can't be," he stammered. Paul folded the letter, shoving it back. "Fine. Keep your blood money." They stormed out, slamming the door, their footsteps fading down the driveway. We sat in stunned silence, and then the tears came anew. Not for the $50,000, which would certainly ease our burdens by paying off lingering debts, but for the depth of Uncle George's thoughtfulness. All those years, he had held back, protecting the purity of our connection. "He was wiser than we knew," Robert murmured, pulling me close. In that moment, grief mingled with profound gratitude, teaching me that true family leaves legacies of the heart, not merely of the wallet. Years later, the tables turned in a way I never imagined. My business had taken off. I'd started a small software company specializing in local apps for small towns, pulling in $150,000 a year after years of hustle. Robert and I finally paid off the house, and the kids were thriving. But then came the call from Mom. She was 70 now, her once sharp features softened by age and illness, her voice weak over the phone. "Jennifer, I have cancer. Stage 3. Treatments cost $200,000. You're doing well now. Can you help? Please, daughter." I paused, memories flooding back like a bitter tide. All those years of neglect, her sending Andrew to private school while I worked 2 jobs for community college tuition. Her cold words when I begged for $500 during my own health scare in college. "Figure it out yourself, Jennifer. We can't afford extras with Andrew's needs." She'd hung up, leaving me to borrow from friends, scraping by on ramen and fear. Robert urged me to think it over, his kind eyes searching mine as we sat at our kitchen table, the same one where Uncle George had shared so many meals. "Jen, she's your mom." But after everything, I nodded, deciding to visit. Driving to their modest apartment in the city, downgraded after Dad's failed investments, I felt a mix of anger and pity. Andrew was there too, lounging on the couch, his once boyish face now puffy from years of easy living, squandering his inheritance on failed schemes like that $50,000. Sure thing stock tip. That tanked. Mom lay in bed, her gray hair thin, eyes pleading. "Jen, honey, we need the money. Surgery's next month." I sat beside her, holding her frail hand, veins prominent under papery skin. "Mom, why didn't you ask sooner? You know I'd help, if I were you." She blinked, confusion turning to horror as my words echoed her own from decades ago. "What? Jennifer, that's not fair. I was stressed back then with your brother." Andrew jumped in, his voice whiny. "Sis, come on. We're family. You owe us. Mom raised you." I stood, calm but firm. "Raised me? You mean left me with scraps while Andrew got everything? The new clothes? The car at 16 for $8,000? College paid in full? I built my life despite you, not because of you." Mom's eyes filled with regret, tears streaming. "I'm sorry, Jen. I was wrong. Please." I left a small check, $50,000 for basics, but no more. "Use it wisely," I said, walking out. Months later, she passed, Andrew wasting what little remained on more bad bets. Reflecting now, it wasn't just revenge, it was closure. Uncle George's quiet generosity taught me true family values, love without strings. Mom's favoritism scarred me, but it forged my strength. Robert held me that night. "You did what was right for you," and for the first time, I felt free, honoring the past without being chained to it. With the $50,000 inheritance from Uncle George safely in our bank account, Robert and I sat down one evening to figure out how to honor his memory. The money wasn't a fortune, but it felt like a gift from beyond, a quiet nod to the years we'd shared. "Jen, what do you think he'd want?" Robert asked, his voice soft as he sipped his coffee at our worn kitchen table. The kids were in bed, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I thought back to Uncle George's stories, his regrets over lost family, his joy in simple things like gardening or reading to the grandkids. "Nothing flashy," I replied. "Maybe fix up the backyard he loved. Plant those apple trees he always talked about, and set aside some for the kids' education, like he wished he'd done for his son. We started small. The next weekend, Robert and I drove to the local nursery, buying saplings and soil. As we dug holes in the earth, sweat beading on Robert's forehead under his baseball cap, he chuckled. "Remember when George fixed that fence? Said it was therapy for old bones." I laughed, wiping dirt from my hands. "Yeah, and he'd sit out here watching the sunset, saying it reminded him of his Navy days on the open sea." Planting those trees felt like planting roots for our future. A tribute to the man who'd become more than family, he'd taught us resilience. My own business, a small online consulting firm for local manufacturers, began to thrive around then. I'd started it part-time years ago, juggling it with the kids and Uncle George's care. Now, with the extra funds, I invested $10,000 in better software and marketing. Clients poured in, $150,000 in revenue that first year alone. "Jen, you're killing it," Robert said one night, pulling me into a hug after I closed a big deal. His arms were still strong, his mustache tickling my cheek like always. "Proud of you." But success brought reflections on my past. Robert, the kids, even my budding friendship with an old colleague named Lisa, who reminded me of lost connections, filled that void. One day Lisa called. She'd been through her own family betrayals, much like mine. "Jen, coffee? I could use a friend." We met at a cozy diner, her dark curls framing a warm smile. Over pie, we shared stories. "My folks favored my brother too," she admitted, left me scraping by. I nodded. "Same here, but I've built my own life." By evening's end, something sparked. "Want to grab dinner sometime?" she asked. I'd like that. It was a new beginning, echoing Uncle George's lessons. Embrace the family you choose. Let go of the pain. As I drove home under the stars, I whispered thanks to him. Life moved forward, richer for the bonds we'd forged.